Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. We're letting some more people join us. Hi, good evening, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome to the Spring 2023 installment of our Community Conversations series. I'm Wendy Guastafaro, Director and Professor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice, housed within the College of Social Work and Criminal Justice here at Florida Atlantic University. The community that is gathered here tonight is comprised of students, faculty, staff, administrators, special guests, and friends of FAU, our campus partners, and engaged community members. We are grateful that you have chosen to spend part of your evening with us. Our college launched this conversation series as a space to learn, discuss, and explore issues affecting our local communities, with a focus on where the professions of social work and criminal justice intersect. The College of Social Work and Criminal Justice is uniquely positioned to host these impactful conversations because of our vision, which is to strive for a more just, resilient, and equitable society that honors the dignity and worth of every person. And this is why we are here tonight. We intend for this to be a conversation, and we want to hear from you. Please post your questions for our panelists in the chat box, and we will get to as many as we can during the Q&A. And it is now my pleasure to introduce our panelists. First up, welcome to Matt Soeth. Matt serves as Head of Community at Spectrum Labs AI, supporting the #TS Collective community as a founding member. Matt is also an advisor to the All Tech is Human nonprofit, working to expand and improve responsible tech ecosystems. Matt is also a former member of the Global Trust and Safety team at TikTok and the co-creator of #Digital4Good, that's the number 4, Digital for Good, an annual event celebrating youth who make a social impact using tech. Prior to that, Matt worked in education for 15 years, where he interacted with youth and tech in the early days of social media, helping to create policy and resources for online safety in schools. Thank you for joining us, Matt. Next, we have Atencia Earp-Bowen, a licensed clinical social worker and instructor in the Phyllis and Harvey Sandler School of Social Work here at FAU. Prior to joining the faculty, Atencia served as a school social worker, providing an array of services to children and families within the Broward County School District. Thank you for your time this evening, Atencia. We also have Dr. Samir Hinduja, a professor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice, and an award-winning expert in cyberbullying and safe social media use. Samir is the co-director of the Cyberbullying Research Center and the co-founder and co-editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Bullying Prevention. His work has been featured in such venues as CNN's Anderson Cooper 360, NPR's All Things Considered, the BBC, and the New York Times. He also received Auburn University's Global Anti-Bullying Hero Award and presented on cyberbullying at a congressional briefing on Capitol Hill, in addition to his many other achievements. Thank you for your time tonight, Samir. I will turn it over to our panelists to begin tonight's conversation.
Hello, everyone. Appreciate your time this evening. I know that your time is valuable, and so we do want to make this a good use of it. And so the first thing I wanted to do is, apart from those introductions, and thank you, Wendy, for giving them, allow each of our panelists to tell the audience just a little bit more about themselves, how their work interacts with youth or intersects with youth, how their work also intersects with social media, both the positives and the negatives. I'll go first since I have the floor, and I'll just say that I've always grown up working with youth in a variety of capacities, community organizations, schools, and I remember how difficult it was to just work my way through adolescence. And so just being self-reflective about that period of my life had me always thinking about how difficult it is, number one, and number two, how social media and technology has complicated things even further when it comes to just the issues we struggle with related to identity and self-loathing and trying to fit in and peer pressure and social comparison. And so with that, I've always just been involved in technology from a very early age because my father had a computer business. And so I was able to just naturally intersect my affinity towards caring about youth and youth culture with my desire to always learn more about hardware, software, networking, and the like, and then just be able to study a lot of phenomenons that have evolved online. Atencia?
Thanks, Samir. That's a great intro. I like how you started off with the personal background, because for me as well, personally, I worked with Boys and Girls Club is really how I got started with social work in general. Didn't really know what I was doing or why I was going to go there, but a lot of experiences during that time I was able to witness, and it was more fun working with the younger teens when I was younger, but I got to see a lot of what they experienced, and taking it back to my days, I get to see how my lifestyle and how I grew up is different from my two young adult children now, and they had to face a lot of the electronic world and some of the bullying that comes along with that. Playing a role as a school social worker and a parent, I got to see a lot of things firsthand from both perspectives. And so it really has been close to my heart, especially because it has happened in my own household. And so that has really brought a lot of thought to me and gave me a different lens. Also, I worked in elementary school, and we would be surprised at how much even elementary school children, school-age children, are on the internet and watching things maybe that we don't think that they should or have access to it. And so that was a huge problem when I was a school social worker, the young children having access and parents and other students being exposed to it. That's a little about me for starters, and I'll hand it over to you, Matt.
Yeah, I love these backgrounds. Similarly, I was always, my grandfather was pretty innovative, so I'm dating myself, but he used to repair television. So if you remember the old TVs and tubes and other stuff, and that's how I kind of discovered how electricity worked, and would just start playing with different stuff. I was lucky to have all that. I started teaching in the early 2000s, and the first year I was in the classroom was the first year phones came out with full keyboards, right? Texting, other stuff. MySpace was on the rise. I had students come in like, Misuse, I have 5,000 friends on MySpace. I'm like, we don't even have 5,000 people in this school. Like, what is going on? And so from there, it just kind of evolved, right? The biggest change I saw in tech when I was teaching at the time was in 2008. Once smartphones entered the picture and there was access to social media in schools, that's when you just started seeing stuff coming up. And in the trust and safety industry, right, we talk about stuff that's like, oh, this is bullying and harassment, or this is sextortion, things like that. And when I would talk to high school students, they would just tell me it's just drama. And a lot of the stuff, behaviors that we would see happening in school were the same things that have always been happening, and I was just taking place online. In those days, I was teaching English literature. I have a strong background in student leadership, which is really what kind of helped thrust me into this space, and working with students to kind of develop school-wide solutions in how we can make just internet and these interactions better, right? So when something does pop up online, training young people how to respond, how to think about it, understanding the behaviors, proper reporting, because that was an issue too, right? If something happens and you tell a teacher or principal and they're like, yeah, whatever, and they blow it off. Well, if you're not going to do anything, why am I going to tell you? And really understanding how those systems and processes work. And that's where a lot of my nonprofit work came in, was working with schools, doing a lot of speaking engagements, education, training around admin and educators and youth to make something happen. And honestly, if something's going to change at the school level, it's going to come from young people, right? Because they're the ones who are on the tech, they see it, they're using it every day. And that was a big difference maker. For me, I mean, it's still close to my heart. I'm still involved in a couple of foundations that focus on youth development, leadership development. That's still a crucial part, whether it happens online or offline, but developing those essential skills. And my tech background, and we mentioned TikTok. I was on the advisory board at Twitter many years ago, which most of you following that no longer exists. No Elon jokes yet. It's still early. And then from there, just I'm working with a bunch of platforms. I've worked with Snap, I've worked with Instagram and others. I know there's some other experience in this room, and I'm just kind of grateful for the time that I had when tech emerged and working with young people and kind of seeing what that impact is. And even at TikTok, I love that I got to bring that experience there. And some of the things that we talked about in this room is thinking about how can we take the same stuff that was happening at the school level, individual level, and how do you do that at scale, right? When, I'm at a school with 1,800 people versus I'm on a platform that has 1 billion monthly active users. How you do outreach and communication engagement is very different. And so trying to think through that, getting able to create stuff, and still, I can still go to TikTok and be like, oh, there's that thing I made. That's always kind of a cool little bragging factor. Fun anecdote, my daughter has told her friends I work at TikTok and none of them believe her. So hopefully someday you could help validate her, but she's just like, I told him you work there. No one believes me. And I'm like, do you care? She's like, no. All right.
Matt, you're always trying to use your position for clout. Keep working on that. I love the background from you as well as from Atencia, and I already have questions for each of you, and I know you have some for me as well. But before we do that, I just wanted to take our audience on a walk down memory lane, if you don't mind, just for a second. So we all, or some of us, actually, before I do that, I do want to give a shout out to a few of my colleagues, our colleagues that we see from Trust and Safety, from schools who are on this call. Darren Lauer, one of my good friends from British Columbia. We have Janet Thorson, we have Marie Forsberg. I'm sure there's more, and I'll go through the list later, but I just want to extend my gratitude for you coming and supporting what we're trying to do here tonight. Okay, back to our walk down memory lane. Some of you are old enough to remember what they called Web 1.0, Web 1.0. And for me, I'm thinking about these very basic HTML pages. Some of you learned HTML coding that long ago, and you're able to add an image here or there, maybe a QuickTime video. And back then, all of us were consumers of content that was being created by massive media organizations and companies. Then, of course, I would say in the mid-2000s, we moved to what is considered Web 2.0. And that is also known as the social web. And Matt mentioned MySpace, and I can think about Tumblr and some of these other platforms that we were on way back in the day. But we moved to the concept of how it's going to be all about user-generated content, moving us into the next era. And we can see how that has completely taken off and grown the internet exponentially. And I think that more and more of us will contribute to the web, will contribute to social media and these platforms, even if we're not really doing it right now as we earn our college degree or as we're trying to find our footing in the workforce. But it's bound to happen. So moving from Web 2.0, we're starting to get more and more into what they call Web 3. When you think about Web 3, you think about blockchain technologies, you think about decentralization. I think about the generative AI. I think also about the metaverse and metaverse spaces, metaverse environments. I think about augmented reality, where many of you grew up on Pokemon Go, and you used your phone as an intermediary to be able to then look for objects and Charizard and whoever else out there in your neighborhood. And you think about virtual reality, of course, with our headsets, which many of you got during the holiday season over the last handful of years, whether it's a Meta Quest or PlayStation VR. So my point with all of this is that lots of positives. These technologies are helping us in so many ways. They're helping us meet our educational needs, our entertainment needs, our communication needs, our relational needs, definitely commerce, as well as other business sorts of goals that we have. tons of positives, and we never want to neglect those positives, even though the media likes to focus on the negatives. Most of the sound bites we hear, because they prey or feed on our fear, uncertainty, and doubt, are negatively slanted, talking about how this or that is an epidemic spiraling out of control, leading to all this moral panic and leading to a lot of adults, parents, guardians, mentors, educators being very freaked out. And everyone who's a millennial or younger on this call understands that, because their parents were probably freaked out as well when they were growing up and trying to embrace all of these technologies. So as we think about this walk down memory lane, I want you to think about how our goal isn't just to reduce toxicity in your favorite game, whether it's Elden Ring or whether it was back in the day when you were on Club Penguin Island. Our goal isn't to cut down only on cyberbullying or sextortion, as Matt mentioned. Our goal is to really promote positive behaviors, positive interactions. Think about Twitch, think about these healthy online communities that are governed by a streamer who then has their friends as moderators and who are kind of dictating what the social norms are for discourse, what is appropriate, what's not appropriate, and then thinking, okay, how can this be applied to other environments so that all of us, when we go online, we enjoy ourselves and we're not dealing with stress or embarrassments or depression or anxiety or some of these other negative psychological, emotional, and as we've even seen, behavioral consequences, whether that's suicidality, delinquency, minor and moderate forms of school violence. So I'm done with the walk down memory lane, and my two questions are as follows. And Tencia, we'll start with you, and then we'll move on to Matt. Tencia, with your work with youth, thinking about Boys and Girls Club, thinking about NGOs, thinking about schools, what are some positive stories and negative stories you've heard related to education, K through 12 education, and youth in that bucket? And then also thinking about what we can do moving forward, let's say short-term and long-term, I'd love to hear. And Matt, I turn that over to you after Atencia speaks, but I would like you to focus on platforms, social media platforms. Again, positives and negatives you've seen, you've heard, as well as long-term, short-term and long-term goals moving forward. Atencia?
Thanks, Mir. Some of the positives that I've seen happen as a result of social media or the internet in itself, I guess I would say, I'm a mental health specialist, so that's my main focus. And I work with a lot of students, teens, young adults who maybe have not been able to experience getting the support they need as a result of bullying, as a result of relationship issues, family issues. And so I feel like social media has been a great segue to allow young adults, youth, to be able to now join in with other youth and talk, have discussions, participate in groups, and actually move from a place of depression where they're actually now being able to have a social norm about themselves. So I've seen that. To me, that has been a positive. It's also as a result of the pandemic, as a result of COVID, we've had to transition and switch our gears. And although it may not have been what used to be and what we saw, but a lot more people have been able to, a lot more youth have been able to access therapy, have been able to access counseling. Regardless of what, there are lots of platforms out there that have allowed this. I don't know if I should mention any, but like BetterHelp has been a way that people now, they're across the platforms, social media, commercials, podcasts, they're everywhere. And so it's normalizing the idea that getting help and support is okay. So I do think that that's a great positive. It's also allowed families to become involved with that process, whereas they wouldn't have before. So I do see those as positives. As for the future, I do think that families remaining involved and not being where the students or the children are the only one, the sole person involved with their social media and their internet processes. I think that's a huge deal. But listen, we need our parents to be involved across the board, not only with internet. So I think that plays a role in us trying to get families together And this is how internet and social media could do that. I also want to mention that there are some programs now that have been developed to teach the lay people how to recognize if a youth is, you mentioned a little bit earlier, Samir, about suicidality. If a young person is a little bit different, if they're not the norm, how do we as community members, teachers, staff, how do we notice that something is wrong with little Johnny? How are we noticing that something's different? And what do we do in that if we find that to be a situation that we see? So I think that is some areas of progression that I've seen. There are lots of programs out there. One, for instance, youth mental health first aid. And so I think there are some strategies being provided. And so I just hope in the future that we all can get together as a community to utilize some of them.
I love that. And as I mentioned in the chat, we know that youth will gravitate towards these online mediums and technologies in order to receive help, simply because they might be extremely uncomfortable approaching a counselor or even their parents face to face, which of course is a bit of a shame, but let's reach them where they're at.
I think that's a great statement. When it comes to messaging, as a teacher, that was always my philosophy is like, you got to hit kids where they're at. And how do you eliminate the excuse? There's so many avenues to get a message out. And it's at some point, I always felt like there should be ownership. It's like, as a teacher, it's like, how do I set up a process and procedure? How many places can I get that message out and make it so easy to find that, someone can get it? And we're thinking more broadly, like whether it's getting help, getting assistance, things like that. And that's where I think it's so important, particularly with young people, like peer-to-peer education is such a massive force, right? We know that kids are 40% more likely to go to other young people to get help with stuff. As adults, Tensia, to your point, I think is brilliant. I think what adults vastly underestimate is their life experience. We get so caught up in the wall that is perceptively tech, that we often forget about the fact that we've had good and bad relationships, and we've had good and bad experiences online, and we have people in our lives that we've interacted with on multiple levels. And the disconnect of that, just because it's online, doesn't mean that changes, the potential advice or interaction or the social construct from that. It's just a different way that things are happening. You've given me like 5 million directions to go out. So I'm going to try and focus this because we'll have some fun. But I mean, it's funny with the screen example. I remember I was talking to Dr. Michael Rich at Boston Children's Hospital, and he works with screen addiction, which is a whole nother rant we could go off on. But he brought up an interesting point. Like, here's someone who meets with individuals who are these are people who play like 30 hours of gaming straight, right? Not because it's fun and a birthday weekend and there's pizza, but because that's just what they would do. And so within that framework, he said when the pandemic hit and he still had appointments, but they're all virtual, he had 0% missed appointments. And he said oftentimes young people, they'd miss the appointments with him, but as soon as the pandemic hit and everything was on the screen, like people showed up. Didn't know why, didn't really have any connection. Obviously something worth researching, but I think it lends credence to the statement that young people, I think, do feel more comfortable on a screen sometimes, and having that barrier, it's almost like creating a safe space. I often joke, I'm excited about this room. And one of the things that got me fired up for this talk is I think like my role, trust and safety, is I feel like we are the social workers of the internet, right? The one benefit of my education background is understanding and knowing human behavior. That is 100% of what online safety work is you are working with humans at a very large scale. I always tell people, particularly educators who want to transition, like if you can manage a classroom, like it's 30 people to 30 million, like you're using similar tools to like modify behavior and to check people. 80% of the problems that happen online are caused by 5% of the people. The rest are individuals who make a mistake, who are having a bad day. They may not know the social norms. A good example, there's a youth messenger app we work with, and it's largely under 13, right? So similar to Kids Messenger at Facebook, but you get kids as young as 4 up to 10 years old. They're talking to parents, they're talking to friends. And one of the things that we discovered in that app, if you are a parent or have younger siblings or nieces, nephews, whatever, if you're 4 to 6 years old, one of your favorite words to use is poop. And it's not because you're calling someone poop. It's not because you are saying something is poop, but it's because you're like, I have to go poop. Oh, what were you doing? I was in the bathroom going poop. kids are freakishly honest, right? They will tell you anything. They will tell you exactly what they're doing. Like there's no shame there. And so when we think about, well, how, do we need to moderate that? How do we approach that in a platform? Those are the kind of things that we want to consider when it comes to, do we take those words out? Do we keep those words in? Is it something we're concerned about? In this case, no, because they're just telling everyone what they're doing. And that's, when you're 4, that's what you do. When you get a question, you tell the truth. Another thing, back to Tenzi's background that I still think is 100% true is there's Boys and Girls Club study from the late 60s that came out. And this idea about one caring adult, right? We talk a lot about parents, but it could be a mentor, it could be a guardian, Boys and Girls Club, church leader, you name it. Anyone has the ability to impact the life of a youth. The foundation I work with, we started a program called Just 5 Minutes. And that's the whole concept behind it is, could you spend 5 minutes a day with a young person playing catch, reading a book? And it's not the activity, but it's the conversation that comes with that sense of community, that sense of connection. When we think about online, the number one positive I see is community. And that is where we have an opportunity to connect with others. During the pandemic, as an example, Thorne did a massive amount of research. And one of the things that we discovered at the time as a TikTok was that there's a very large presence of LGBTQ plus in the TikTok platform. And one of the main components of feedback they got from that is that individuals were so isolated that in their hometown community, wherever it is that they lived, they may not have that sense of connection to other humans. However, when they came online, they could find their people and they had a way to reach out and to ask questions and to be connected and get support. And at the end of the day, across the totality of human existence, like that's what most humans crave, is that sense of community and belonging and connectedness. And so as we start to look at the platforms that are out there, the things that I see is when people go online and they're looking for good experiences and they're connecting with others and their goal is content that entertains or informs or, they find interesting, most of the time good things happen. What I've also discovered is when people go online and they're not in a good mental state, or they're seeking out negative content, or they're looking for stuff that is not necessarily positive, you tend to get the same result. These algorithms are very good at finding you the things that you're searching for, whether they know you need it or not. And one of my jobs working on these platforms was to try and develop interventions when individuals look up certain terms. So let's say it might be suicide, self-harm related, or eating disorders, or things of that nature. My job would be to develop these points of interruption or resources or help stuff in order to kind of disrupt that pattern, right? And anything we do to kind of to break that trend. The other thing, positive and negative, God, there's so many stories. I'm trying to remember which ones would be the good ones. One of my favorite stories from my teaching days was 2015. And this is where I think they're good on the internet. But I remember I got a random text. I had a Google Voice number students could text, and I'm getting ready to go to bed, and I get a message, and it's just the message was, "Mr. So, it's happening." I'm like, "What's happening?" Like, "Don't worry, we got this," which is very weird to get at like 10 o'clock at night. I'm like, "All right." The next morning I show up. There's like 15 kids in front of the school. They're waiting to see the principal, and at this point, the nonprofit I started education been doing, this has been about 4 years that this had been going on. And when it happened, there was a student at a school across town who had put out a tweet and said, "Hey, if I get 50 likes on this post, I'm going to share this photo I got from this girl at school." And he got the 50 likes and he posted the photo. And the photo was down in less than 2 minutes because the kids were paying attention. They were watching. As soon as it came up, they all reported it. Photo got taken down. And I think that's the dream scenario. When you have a healthy community, it takes care of itself. And that's one of the goals we're trying to do on platforms. A healthy community is a resilient community. It doesn't mean bad things happen, right? You can go into any town in America and find a crime report. I guarantee you I could walk into anyone's house and start snooping around and be like, "Ooh, look what I found in your cabinet," right? People are doing it to TikTok and Snapchat all the time. Like, "Ooh, look what I found in your platform." Yes, like stuff exists. Like no one's saying we're perfect. But what are we doing to make sure we ensure a healthy community? And that's where, if you're seeing the conversations, in Europe, there's the Digital Services Act, which is new regulation around what we look at and don't look at. But there's conversations in the US, like Kids Online Safety Act, where government bodies are now getting involved and trying to help platforms say like, hey, what can we be responsible for at the government level? What can platforms be responsible on the lower level? Most large platforms have what's called a transparency report, right? And like TikTok has a great one. Reddit just put out a transparency report. And what those reports can tell you is literally what type of content gets taken down, how much of it gets taken down as a percent, and can give you some insight. If you want to know what platforms are doing, it's a good way to look into that. Hopes and dreams. There's so many conversations happening. I don't know if anyone here tuned in to the TikTok on Capitol Hill. If you're a policy person, you loved it. If you're not, it probably wasn't very exciting. But what I took away from the conversation, and I hope others can see, is we need to have a much bigger conversation around data privacy in this country. The data privacy conversation, there's so much out there. You've all had this experience, right? Where you're just like, hey, I like Doritos. And then on your phone, it's like, did you know Doritos are on sale at blah, blah, blah grocery store now? That's a half truth, right? We can argue, and there's data and conspiracy videos about whether or not your phone is listening or Alexa's listening or all that other stuff. But invariably as humans, there's these non-subtle cues of maybe something we searched, something we typed in, something we did online. But there's all these points of data, and there's these backend systems that are constantly collecting that and data, creating these little clusters. And then there's these large data markets where stuff is getting sold broadly to advertising firms and marketers and other groups. That's to a small degree where Cambridge Analytica came from. And so as we think about data privacy, Europe has what's called the GDPR. US does not have anything yet. And I think those are great conversations because we can debate and discuss TikTok all day, but Cambridge Analytica came from Facebook and still nothing has happened outside of a massive fine. And so we need to think about how our government's holding large platforms accountable for what's being collected, how it's being collected, things like that. To that end, there's all that data. Gosh golly, I hope we can get some more research. I think there's some great research that's happening. However, and legitimately, I'll say Cambridge Analytica again. If you don't know it, Google it. That's just, it's a platform's worst nightmare. We need to get researchers access to the data on platforms to better understand the behaviors that are happening, why they're happening. Because we're at a point in history, we've never had a space where this many people can interact at one time in one place. It's never happened. And I think if we can have a better understanding of what that looks like, examples, ton of research on this, right? But we know historically that youth mental health crisis has been increasing offline for many years. And then social media comes in and, we talk about fear mongering or, media crises and things like that. It's like, oh, well, the mental health is so bad because of what's happening online. Maybe we can make these corollary connections, but it's not an absolute yet, right? They're like very specific markers. I kind of want to know if that's the problem, then how do we address it, right? Is it looking at algorithms? Is it looking at what's being shared? Is it the type of content? Or are there offline indicators? Are there things that are happening? And then honestly, my other like nerd out moment, I saw someone on there, I saw some Gen Z and other stuff. So I'm on the tail end of Gen X. Please don't judge me. My wife is just a couple years younger. She's a millennial. My kids are Gen Z, Gen Y. What's fascinating to me is as I look at generationally how these groups are getting labeled, I noticed there's a direct connection to how those groups also interact with tech. And I had students who'd be in high school who had older siblings in college, and they're both using different apps. I talk to kids in college and be like, yeah, so-and-so's using this. I don't even know why. That's a dumb app. I don't know why they're using it, which I just found fascinating. And so I'm curious as we talk about Web3, I have no idea if VR and NFTs and stuff are going to take off. But as we start to look at that, are we going to see different ways in which our generations interact and communicate based upon the technology that's available and the apps that sort of become popular, or not popular over time as we move forward. That's a bit of a rant, but yeah, just some interesting things.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, a lot comes to mind. And I just made a couple of notes and I just want to share my thoughts briefly. And then Atenzia, I have a really great question for you, which I think will help a lot of the audience members.
Sure.
First, that I want to say that because of the growth of all of these issues, the frequency of harm, the scope of it, there are a lot of jobs available for individuals who want to get into this field. So every student who's on this call, or even individuals who are looking to maybe shift gears. Matt mentioned that he was in education before. And so, now, or he has been working in trust and safety for a number of years. And it's just all about connecting sociology, psychology, criminology, education with computer science for sure, but also information technology. There's no business. There's a number of fields that can come together. And as long as you're someone who loves to learn, I really do think that there's positions available right now, and they'll continue to be so. So, talk to me if you're one of my students, or you go to FAU or you go to another university. Happy to help you towards that end. The second thing that I'll bring up has to do with our criminal justice professors who are on the call. Many of us are familiar with the concept of secondary victimization, which simply means that if law enforcement responds to the scene of a domestic assault and the victim, again, he or she's been targeted, they are able to summon enough courage to articulate what happened, and even though they're nervous, even though they're fearful of retaliation, but let's say that law enforcement officer treats them callously or is dismissive or trivializes the harm that they experienced, well, then they're being victimized another time, a second time. And so all of this, to me, brings us back to the issue related to social media platforms. And so I'll bracket that for one moment, but it is essential that social media platforms respond to me, to you, to our children, to our teenagers in a way that is fast, in a way that provides a feedback loop so that the target is kept up to date as to what is done in terms of a sanction against the aggressor, against someone who is threatening you or created a hate account about you, or is humiliating you, whatever the story is. And so my point with that is that many of you are majoring in criminology and criminal justice, and that's just another example about how all of this dovetails. The last thing that I want to say before I turn it over to Atenzia with my question is, you mentioned they could find their people online. So thinking about communities, thinking about how young people, or even those who are older, they gravitate online and they're looking to belong, they're looking to connect. And so at the top of my mind is marginalized individuals who belong to groups which are disadvantaged historically, who haven't really had a voice, haven't really had a say, haven't really had opportunities. And to be sure, those populations are benefiting the most, I would say, from all these technological developments. And I think that's really, really cool to, in part, sort of level the playing field, at least when it comes to opportunities. And that isn't just when it comes to marginalized populations, but I think about other countries, developing nations, emerging nations. So thank you for letting me share those points. My question to you, Atenzia, is, if you put on your mental health professional hat, your social worker hat, your parent hat, I'd love for you to think how you might try to raise an elementary schooler, a middle schooler, and a high schooler in this connected world. And I'll keep it vague, but just whatever comes to mind, thinking about super young, let's say tween or teen, and then 16, 17, 18-year-old in this wired world.
You mentioned quite a few things earlier that I wanted to respond to. I'm going to still respond to this and get back, because it is a difference, I would say, with my mental health hat, my social work hat, or parent hat. There's a difference in that age bracket. So with younger children, I do feel that parents have to have a connection. They have to be able to monitor at all times, limit what's being watched, use those parental controls, things of that nature. I would even go so far as to say middle school, until they start to be able to get some freedoms, because it can be very damaging to the mental, to the emotions, as well as to their behaviors. And so once they get to high school, now they want to start budding off and be able to start branching a bit on their own. So I think that it's feasible, but to let them have some privacy of their own, have some access of their own. But I do feel that they should still play a part in that. You mentioned something about belonging, connection, about how all of our disciplines are actually working together, probably for the first time that I've seen. And I'm still very, very young, so I wouldn't be that long anyway. But we finally see that we all actually play a role in that. And so what that means is that everyone's playing a role in technology, in the internet, social media platforms, all of that. Our grandparents, great grandparents, everyone is playing a role here. So how, I heard Matt mentioning about a lot of the terminology, the techie terminology. And sometimes I think what maybe as a parent who teach social worker, therapists, the question is, yes, we want to understand why they're looking for this information, why the algorithms are doing this or doing that, but what are the interventions? What can we do? What can we put in place? Parents, other community members may not understand all of that. So how can we come together again to be able to, where each of us has a piece to put into place to say, hey, these are some things that we should do, because we understand that, guess what? People there's such thing as revenge porn. Maybe parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles might not know what that is, and it doesn't sound like something to them coming from the teen, right? So how do we make these connections where the parents, I did like that you mentioned community, but how do we do it? How we do that is by starting like this, but everyone playing a role and having a say so, and listening to the parents who think that it may be too much. And parents and families may be listening to how important this is to the youth or young adults, about how important that is to them. Because I do know many children who do not have access, do not have a social support system. And some of them maybe game often. Some don't do anything but maybe look at YouTube videos all day. And mentally, this really does something as far as when they go out into the workforce, right? They don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to form and establish relationships. They don't know how to handle a situation that happens on the job. Because yes, we would love for most of our youth to, if they're on the computer, sit at home and be on the computer all day. But the likelihood of that happening is really not that large. They will have to come out and communicate in society in some form or fashion. And I just feel like some of us are not able to do that as well, because we don't have those connections and we're not blending together to give our perspectives and accept our perspectives. I hope
Yeah,
I answered.
Yeah, I tend to see what I'm hearing from you is that obviously it just requires normal wisdom. You don't need to get caught up in the technology. It's just about how are you raising a decent human being who has self-control, who is focused on their future, who is able to understand that there are these various negatives and they need to take advantage of the controls within technology, the feature sets that each of these apps and platforms provide to them, so that they can block, so that they can mute, so that they can report, so that they can take care of their own well-being. They cannot fully be turning to everyone else to do that for them. And I know, Matt, in a comment, you also mentioned the importance of resilience and how resilience is built not through the avoidance of risk, but through engagement with it. And so in a protective environment such as our home, and I think this is what you're getting at, we have to continue to shepherd them. We have to introduce them to a little bit of this risk, but always be able and available to plant seeds of common sense and discretion and internet safety 101, I would say, in a number of ways. I think that's probably how you would try to raise an elementary schooler, middle schooler, or high schooler in this time. Matt, do you have anything to add there?
I don't know if I'll say it as well, but yeah, I love all those summaries. I agree with that. I'll give you an example. So when I first got hired at TikTok, my daughter was trying to be cool for her friends, and so she actually downloaded TikTok and used her school email, which I do not have eyes on, to create the account, right? And we caught her and all that other stuff, and she was just crushed because her friends were on TikTok and everyone was there, and I'm just like kid, like I work there. The law says you got to be 13. Like if I work there, like I can't break the rules. Like these are very bad things. And she's like sitting there crying, and we're in the car driving to school, and she's like crying. She's like, "You're ruining my life with trust and safety." And now she's almost 13, and she's just like, I get to get TikTok, right? And so I had actually, Samir, I think it was a book you recommended from a former student about her life on social media. I said, all right, we're going to read the book. Let's have a conversation. And then we'll go from there. What I've learned, everything that's been shared is my daughter's pretty good. She does have a flair for the dramatic. She's done a few things where she's tried to access stuff that she shouldn't. And we've had consequences for that. But for the most part, she tends to do the right thing. And so we try to lean into that. As a parent, I try to model as much as I can. So that could be, whether looking at phones on the table, being mindful of like talking to my kids and putting my phone down. Looking at what kind of apps I'm using, having conversations about what apps I use. So I'll have sometimes if I'm on Instagram or something, I'll have the kids use it with me. I've even done stuff where I'll take a picture. My son is the funniest. He's the most adamant about this, but I'll take their picture and be like, all right, I'm going to share this. Are you okay with that? And my son's just like, no, I don't like that photo. Like he has no fear. He'll just tell me. But trying to get to that conversation about having permission, because in the end, like just recently in local middle school, we had an issue with a young person who took a picture of another female student at the school and then sent it to the boy she liked. And of course, it's like one of those awkward, embarrassing photos, and said, "Oh, are you sure you like this girl? Look at her now." And that turned into a whole thing. And so trying to eliminate those issues as kids grow up and really understand, how to set boundaries and how to communicate what you're okay with and what is okay versus not okay. And really understanding, why those matters. And, Atencia, this is brilliant. You both brought this up, Samir as well. If you have, again, that caring adults, that sense of confidence to be able to do the right thing when the moment matters, because no matter how much I do with my kids to build them up and do the right, like they're going to screw up, and that's fine. It's part of being human. But when they get in those tougher situations, my confidence that they're more likely to do the right thing is a little bit higher. Or my hope that they'll do the right thing is a little bit higher, because we've had those common practice experiences leading up to that, right? That they have a supportive place to come back to, and hopefully they're not afraid of those long-term consequences after everything's said and done.
I love that. Research shows that being able to help our kids come up with some sort of action plan so that they know what to do when it actually happens, the victimization or when their friend gets targeted, is so very vital, because right now they'll say, yeah, sure, I know what to do. But then in the moment, they often freeze, they get stuck. They're paralyzed. And so role-playing scenarios, according to research, have been extremely valuable in helping youth formulate that action plan about what to do and what not to do in any form or with any form of technology misuse or abuse. Atencia, me, and Matt have spoken a lot. And so, as I mentioned, we really want to value your time and make sure that you get something meaningful out of this conversation. And so, if you don't mind, I'm going to turn it over to my director, Wendy, and she's going to helm our Q&A. And then hopefully we invite the rest of you to pipe up with any other questions or comments. And if we don't get to in this talk, I'm going to do all that I can to get back to you.
This has been a terrific conversation. Thank you to the three of you, but also we've had a very active chat. So I wanted to go back, because we're criminal justice and social work, we had a comment about someone works as a 911 dispatcher and the calls they receive daily regarding students who fall victim to sharing explicit images with strangers online. And there isn't a question. If you look up in the chat, you'll see the rest of the comment, but just talking about, that they're being extorted sometimes by the person that received those images. So I have a question based on that. Like, how do you effectively communicate the risk of that behavior to our youth?
I love that question. I've conducted research on that phenomenon for a number of years, and we'll be collecting new data this year. And I would say a couple of years ago, we found that it was about 5% of youth, and that is 12 to 17-year-olds, who have been victimized in that manner, where they're being blackmailed via the use of explicit pictures that got into the hands of a wrong person. 5%, those of you on this call, you're thinking that's not really high at all. But then when you extrapolate that out to the millions of kids in America, it's actually a significant proportion of youth. And to underscore that point, our research center gets help requests from youth multiple times every single week, where they send us screenshots where they were just flirting and it became amorous or erotic, and it turned into a video chat. It turned into pictures being shared, and then bam, they're being exploited. So in terms of how we deal with this, how do we get youth to understand that sexting allows individuals to deepen intimacy? I understand that it's part of the culture. I know that it's glamorized in a number of popular songs and by celebrities and politicians and athletes. But the reality of flirting relationships or talking relationships or even long-term relationships going south, and then when those images or videos are in the hands of someone who you no longer trust, the chances are very high that they're going to be used against you, or they're going to be leaked, or they're going to be shared with my best friends or my buddies, or I'm going to dysfunctionally cope with the breakup simply because it is such a major affair in my life. And so that's how these victimizations happen. I think we can talk until we're blue in the face to tell youth that just don't take the photos in the first place. Don't take the videos. There's other ways to deepen intimacy that won't lead to this fallout. But I'm very concerned that so many youth suffer from this invincibility complex, and they're not really going to listen to me or other educators unless they get burned or until they get burned. That sounds a little cynical, but that's what I've seen. I'd love to hear from some other people.
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in from the platform side. Several things about this. One, fun fact, when I worked in this before, I came to Samir and asked him, hey, do you have any research? What should we do? So huge plug for him. Two, it's very hard to detect online. So for example, last summer I was at a training, there's a group called InHope. InHope is the largest collection of international helplines for sexual exploitation in the world. We're talking tens of thousands of helplines, and they deal with everything we just talked about: sextortion, grooming, exploitation, human trafficking. And part of that came with the tour of NCMEC, National Center for Exploiting Missing Children. And NCMEC, if you are a tech platform in the US and you have a report of grooming or sexual content of a minor on your platform, you were required by law to report to NCMEC. That was a law passed in the early 2000s. They became the official body in the US. And there's international groups in Interpol, and we could deep dive that later if you're like, how does trust and safety work? What I learned from that event is that in July of last year, there's something like 8 million images or whatever that have been reported and that they've taken in, and they see an increase of these non-consensual images getting shared or exploited in over summertime, right? Because kids aren't in school and there's more interaction, other stuff. Of that, 7% was new content. That means NCMEC has a database of images that platforms can use to detect when this content is being shared and automatically take it down. This is a good thing because no one needs to see this content, moderators, other stuff. What's interesting is the 8% is new content. That means that there are groups out there that are specifically targeting minors for the sole purpose of getting these images out into the market and manipulating them. And so that's where you see increases of human trafficking and what we call sextortion, where they take these images and use it to blackmail additional content. And that's problematic. One, if you've worked with teens, no, almost never works. Right? It's fascinating. And if you don't believe me, just go find a teenager tonight and be like, hey, I want to do this. And you're just like, no, and look at the reaction. If it's my kids, they writhe on the ground and make weird noises. And so within that, thinking about back to earlier stuff, role playing, we would do a message prompt with students and be like, hey, what happens if you got this message? And one of them, we had a 6th grader. She got a text from some boys in there, and he's like, hey, send me a picture of you in your bra. And she actually took her bra and put her school picture in it, and then took a picture of that and sent it. And I thought that was clever as heck, right? But because she felt comfortable enough, and we talked about that, she's like, oh yeah, I know how to respond to this. Similarly, we had another student who was getting these texts, and she actually showed her mom, right? Back to that caring adult and not having parents who are judgmental in the moment, but being supportive. And her mom's just like, oh, that, well, here's how you can respond to that. Knowing that there was a relationship with this person that they were texting, and trying to be mindful of that without, crossing inappropriate lines and having those conversations. So I think there are ways to kind of engage on this, to have conversations about it. It is definitely a problem, and a conversation that I have constantly with my own kids about being aware. The other conversation I have with young people that we found very successful is, why are you sending that photo? Is it because of peer pressure? I think Samiri spoke to this very well. Are you feeling pressured to do it? Is it something you want to do? And the idea is in that, particularly middle school and up, you need to think about relationships and healthy relationships. And that's where I think parents can play a big role, or caring adults can play a big role. Is, if someone really cares about you, they're not going to pressure you to do something you don't want to do. And if you're ever in that moment and you feel that, I think those are great conversations to have developmentally as we think about building healthy relationships in our life. And I think for kids, that's a challenge, right? Because, we want to be liked, we want to be involved. And as a young person, if I meet a friend online, that friend is just as real to me as the kid who lives next door, whether I know they're an adult or not. And there's a lot of research to support that. And as a platform, this is what makes it so challenging to identify grooming, because it's such a positive experience. You meet someone, I'm going to look out for you, I'm going to take care of you. And so being mindful of those cues, I think, is where platforms can do better in supporting young people. But then too, just being aware of like, okay, why is this thing happening? What are they asking? And what do they hope to get from me?
And I'll just add a little something to that. All of that, I love all of your perspectives. So, but we keep mentioning parents, and there is the fact that many children and youth out here do not have parents. Many of them do not have loved ones who care, or neither do they have anyone to guide them in right directions, or what we would societally say is the right direction or morally correct way. So that leaves a lot of error. I saw in the chat someone mentioning, I believe they were from UK, about how can they get people together, a lot of the leaders, how can they get others to know? And I'm like, that's the whole key. Everyone needs to be involved. And it's not just the fact of the matter of just internet only, but we have to be sensitive to anyone and everyone. And we can't just think about how we would control our children or our children in our school, everyone. And we should look at everyone and what they might be going through. And hey, ask. That's something that we talk about, generational. And I feel okay with talking about generational. It came up before that parents and older adults would ask us, are we okay? How are you doing today? Not asking what did you do? What happened? How are you feeling? And letting them know that they are special, that they are. And a lot of children, I'm being honest, a lot of youth don't feel special, don't feel loved. And so some of that is part of the reason for that social media, just longing for the social media platforms or familiarity with others on social media.
There's a lot of activity in the chat, so I encourage everyone to continue to check it out. A number of the questions, and you guys have addressed this along the way, but I think it's worth repeating or adding in information about what parents can do. It seems to me there's action related to their child, conversation and so forth, but there's also just education for themselves about social media platforms. I mean, Samir, when you're starting our intro earlier, I was like, I don't even know what Samir's talking about. So it's like, they don't have, they're not engaging with platforms the way that kids are. And that's what I mean. Like, so what are steps that parents can take so that when they hear Samir talk, they're not like, what? Twitch and this and that, right? I mean,
yeah, so obviously it is very important for me to avoid jargon when I'm speaking to parents or when any of us speak to parents. And I mentioned that they typically come to events or come to the table being very nervous, very concerned, very overwhelmed. They don't have margin really to carve out time to learn how to use the parental monitoring aspects of TikTok or Snapchat or anything like that. And so for me, where I would start is what they're already hopefully doing in their household. We've mentioned resilience. I would also bring it back to empathy. I would bring it back to, having a moral compass. How are you helping your kid? How are you helping your son or your daughter be able to distinguish between wrong and right? In our field, Wendy, obviously we talk a lot about just and unjust. And so how can you raise a kid, whether it's through examples that they might see in their favorite Pixar movie, or whether it's through a favorite book that they're reading, or whether it's through a game that they're trying to, level up in and eventually, beat the final boss. There's different opportunities to extract from all of these settings, all of these environments, these teachable moments and these lessons. And I think cumulatively, they do help in, again, raising a decent human being. And then ideally, you can apply the offline sort of lessons to the online.
Matt, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, no, I think that was brilliant. It's kind of one of the mantras back in the day is like, who you are online is who you should be in real life, and who you are in real life is who you should be online, right? And trying to help young people develop that authentic self I think is just a crucial component to development through schools, through programs and sports and boys and girls and whatever, the community opportunities are. And it could be online. For my son and I, it's Zelda. Zelda and now anime. I had zero interest in anime for most of my life, and now I know more about anime than I ever thought I ever needed to know. And it's just trying to find those moments to interact and engage. 100% agree, right? Because my kids will develop interest. I'm really into sports. My kids like meh, and so trying to find those connection points of where we can have those shared experiences, and what that looks like, I think is going to be crucial. And same in schools, right? Like when I was a teacher, I wouldn't be like, hey, we're going to do this for homecoming. And rather than going to them, be like, hey, what do you guys want to do? And seeing how many individual stakeholders in the campus we can get involved in those conversations, and what does it look like? And, we had a lot of immigrants at the school that I was at who, if you mention homecoming, they're just like, yeah, we don't do that where I'm from. Okay, well, like, how do we then start to educate people and become inclusive in that process? Like, it's a lot of information seeking and engagement and outreach in non-traditional forms to make sure everyone feels included in the process.
Great. Thank you both. Atencia, anything to add to that?
Oh my goodness, the chat has me so engulfed over here.
It's a really active, good chat. Yeah. Darren has raised several good points. And I wanted to make sure we all saw one where he just posted a minute ago, parents have to stop chasing the apps. They change too quickly. We need to teach our kids the sound principles of digital literacy and internet safety that can apply no matter what the platform or app. I think that's, an excellent point to keep in mind, right? It's going to be much more effective to go global than it is to go into specific kinds of apps. So another question that has, again, a theme through some of the questions. Is there, and Samir, you mentioned this right from the outset, are kids, what's the parallel between reporting victimization generally and reporting victimization or problems online? Do we know that?
It depends on the offense, whether I've studied, for example, dating violence offline and dating violence online. And so it sounds weird. Dating violence online, what does that even look like? And so an example would be if I'm always going through my partner's phone when they've just left it on the dinner table to make sure that they're not messaging romantically another person, or I've asked for all their passwords so I can log into their accounts and see their DMs to, again, make sure they're not chatting with someone else, or I physically keep their phone with me when we're out on date night because I don't want them distracted by notifications, or I post something online in order to get them to act more, let's say, sexually loose with me because, for whatever reason, and so there's different passive aggressiveness, power, control, abuse. That's what online dating violence looks like. And so when it comes to, reporting and speaking up, I feel that individuals are more likely to speak up online because offline you're dealing with the immediate possible consequences of physical harm if you live with them or if you see them every night or whatever the situation is. But big picture, you would hope that with all of these platforms, giving individuals the ability to, within a couple of keystrokes or points and clicks on their screen, to be able to report an individual, report a piece of content, that they would do it. But for whatever reason, they hesitate. And maybe they all feel that if they do so, they will be outed by the platform and the person they're reporting on will find out that it's them who reported on them. But I feel like all youth, all young adults, everyone needs to know that whenever you make a report, it's all behind the scenes. And the platform is not going to proactively police misuse that's occurring. But when you let them know about it, they then have an obligation to look into it because it likely violates their terms of service or community guidelines. And so at that point, they will look into it and they will hopefully respond within 24 to 48 hours, which, as I mentioned earlier, is essential just for the mental health of the victim, knowing that something is being done.
Connected to that, I mean, either Matt or Atencia, please jump in, but there's also been a theme about a non-response when youth do file, a report, if you will. And so and that there is often not a response coming back to the youth. So how do we educate the platforms about and get them to take action? It seems like it would be overwhelming. Matt, when you're talking about like 5,000 to 30 million, or Samir, 30 to 30 million, it seems like an overwhelming task to have responses, but necessary.
I think it's extremely overwhelming. I mean, if we think about even reporting, for instance, a domestic violence issue, how much goes into that? And then if you want to discuss and put online, maybe revenge porn or something of that nature in the process, then now you're exposing yourself as a teen or young adult. So how much do you really, and are they really making it safe? Because at some point, someone is going to have to know, or someone will find out. How will someone find out? Because they always find out. And that's just the nature of the beast. But I think the biggest part here is letting children, youth, young adults know that they're safe even when they do it. And not by talk, but by showing that they're safe, that they're not going to be exposed, that they do have the support of others, and they do have the support of the criminal justice system. It seems that sometimes they feel that they're the victim when they are being victimized. And so it would make anyone not want to expose the persons or individuals who are actually doing them harm.
Yeah, and just adding to that, I mean, that's part of the reason we started I Can Help, because it's, I mean, quick history, early days, it was only user reports, right? So you're talking about tens of thousands of emails, or, think about going, if you have this, you go to the deli counter and you pull a number and you're just waiting for someone to call your number. And that's what a lot of these platforms were doing. And there's still a lot of platforms doing that today. And oftentimes, they might go in and handle a handful of reports, but then it's understanding the accuracy of the reports, right? So years ago, YouTube did what's called a trusted flagger program. And so they handpicked a group of individuals to say like, hey, we think that if you give us information, we believe that you're going to give us accurate information, we'll act on it. Out of those trusted flaggers, 60% of the reports that came in were still what we would call false positives, meaning they were inaccurate and not true. And so I think Atencia brings up some good points, because it's when it comes in is we have to look at the data, right? What is the context of which the report is being made? So that's where there's a lot of talk without going into detail, but that's where I like using AI for proactive detection, right? Because most platforms use what's called a keyword base. So it's looking for a single word or phrase to say something bad's happening here. Right. With AI, you can look at conversations in strands. So if someone's being bullied, if someone's being harassed, if someone is being, in this case, if it's violence, dating violence, things like that, is that the mechanism has the ability to look at all that data in context and make an informed decision. It is challenging for platforms, like particularly in gaming, because we've seen individuals who get mad in a game and will mass report someone when they lose, saying, hey, this person did this, and get the person blocked from a platform, when in reality they did nothing wrong but win a match in a specific type of player versus player scenario. That gets tough. In 2015, a friend of mine, Ann Collier, and I started a social media helpline. And we were directly working with platforms and getting phone calls from schools, right? Like, hey, we have this incident. One of those incidents involved a young boy who was getting bullied. And it was posted to a large social media platform. And the context of the video said, hey, help me identify this bully. I want to find out who did that, which in reality is also bullying. And this person is making an active threat against someone online. When we contacted the platform, they said, well, according to our policy, it's a positive. Someone's standing up. They're trying to identify the bully and other stuff. And you're like, at that point, we'd already talked to the school and be like, the school knows exactly who the bully is. This kid is dealing with all the PTSD associated with having to relive this experience by having it played out online and having people reach out to him and say, hey, we saw you get beat up. Are you okay? Can we find this person and beat them up for you? And it was a good couple of days before we finally got the platform to take the video down, because there was a whole process of talking to their policy people and getting the head of the department and other stuff, and kind of agreeing that with the additional context that that's in fact what should happen. And so there's a constant struggle online. I think one, to identify the severity, look at the context as which it's happening, making an informed decision. I know Wayne has some good call outs, about, response times and other stuff. And that is very frustrating. And I think that's why a lot of kids young people, anyone, don't go to adults, a trusted adult, or don't report stuff online, because there's a legitimate feeling that nothing's going to happen. So why should I do it? Nothing's going to matter. And another variable we talked about on there is the social context, right? For most young people, early days, I don't know if this has changed. I know we have experts in the room, so you can correct me, but, early days, we found out like a lot of bullying and harassment, the person knew their aggressor. And so there's a legitimate fear of reporting because, hey, they're going to find out that I tattled. And they didn't want to deal with the repercussions from that. And that's a legitimate fear. So that social context, the human framework around it, I can report this person for sharing this image, but then my parents are going to find out, or family or community, and then I will be judged for that. And I'm more afraid about what others will think of me than making sure this thing stops. And that social element, I think, is a huge roadblock for many individuals to seek appropriate help.
Excellent point. And Atencia, I really appreciated your point on the same issue, which is helping kids know and letting them know that they're safe, that it's okay to talk about the negative that's happening, not just the positive. Very well received comments. Thank you. So we are approaching 7:15, and I just want to say I'm not going to interrupt again with administrative things, but I'm going to turn it over to Samir to maybe make some closing points and the other panelists as well. But please know that if you have to go, we did set our close time for 7:15. We usually allow a few more extra minutes in case there is activity in the chat and lots of audience participation. So we can do that here as well. And if you have to leave, I would just say thank you so much for participating in our community conversations. We will have more events coming up in the fall very soon, but I'm going to turn it over to Samir to take us out.
Thank you, Wendy. Agreed. We're grateful for your time, and you can see that this conversation has been so robust, and there's so many angles and nuances that we can continue to explore. We do want to be respectful of your time, and so I do think that we'll be wrapping up, but I want you to know that if you struggle in some capacity, there's help to be had. If you have a sibling, a younger sibling, if you have a child, if you know someone in your neighborhood, I feel most people need to understand and need to know on a visceral level that there's help to be had. There's people who are pouring their professional lives into these topics. Atencia, myself, Matt, so many others who are on this call. For those of you who work in the trust and safety space and who are on this call, if you want to provide your contact information in the chat window, and if you don't mind people reaching out to you with any questions, that would be great, because without a doubt, we have to co-labor towards solutions. And as was mentioned by Atencia, we have to continue to integrate all of these disciplines. Everyone has a role to play, everyone has a platform, and everyone has a stake in this, because we all work with youth, we all work with young people, and even if it's not them, it's us. We're going to continue to be online, and we want to embrace and exploit all the positives therein without having to deal with so many of the negatives. Don't hesitate to reach out in the future. Again, I just want to extend my appreciation to, of course, Wendy and Segal, and definitely Catherine. Thank you so much for all your administrative work. Atencia, Matt, very grateful for your input. And thank you all for those of you who came today.
Before you close out, I didn't follow my script, so allow me to say,
Yeah, go ahead.
to everyone who joined us, thank you for being here. I did say that part. But if you'd like to watch or share the recording of tonight's conversation, you can find it on our college YouTube channel. Skal did post that in the chat, which is what made me realize I was off script. And again, we'll have another community conversation coming up in the fall. Thank you so much, Samir and Atencia and Matt. It was wonderful conversation, really informative. Appreciate all of the work that you guys are doing out there in the community. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you all. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, students. Thank you, everyone who came, and
Thanks, Ed.
colleagues.
Yay.
Everyone, have a great night. Matt, have a great afternoon. We'll talk again.
Thank you, everyone.
Most definitely. Atencia, so nice to meet you.
Same here, Matt. Thanks for that info. It's a lot I didn't know. So I appreciate it.
Really quick to the panelists before you three drop off, I did save the chat. So if there were any questions directed to you or people who wanted to connect, I'll share that with you all post meeting. Thank you again for being here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my pleasure. If anything else I need to help, please let me know.
Take care, everyone.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Samir. Cheers.